well, you know, this could really bring us to a point where maybe you can make a better case than with your little model photos. Take a photo with one of your miniature trees and show us that that's comparable to what Meier did. Well, he didn't do that. Not only did he not do that, not one skeptic to date has produced a model tree, a photo of a model tree, a photo of the species of the model trees that they would have to be comparable to the real trees in Meier's photos. It's like when the skeptic in our film says, well, notice that these parts of these trees are similar. Well, therefore, it's the same tree. And the skeptic in the film, as you know, was trying to say that Meier had a model tree that he walked around the countryside taking photos with some presumable model that nobody's ever, or models that no one's ever found. So to me, it's fairly simple. It's like, kind of put up and make your case. Now you say you're not only a skeptic, a photographer, and a model maker, but you cultivate these trees. Well, give us something. Jeff not only didn't give us anything, he demanded under threat of lawsuit that I not display his photographs on an article that look out for that tree on my webpage. And for instance, when I gave a presentation at the Ontario Science Center a couple of years back, I showed his photo. This was before he threatened me with anything, and I showed his photos side by side with Meier's, and people in the audience were chuckling, and it's kind of obvious we're not in the same league here. You look at the detail on the craft in Meier's photos, such as the ones that you have up on your website as well, that I forwarded over, and you go, well, wait a minute, that's some pretty fine work. How did this one-armed guy do this? Who did it if he didn't? Why hasn't anybody come forward? Lots of questions are raised, but I'll give you a question, if I may, George.
Sure.
It's a generic question. It's for the listeners of the show, too. How is it that Billy Meier, who has presented in the past 44 years, literally he's taken hundreds of clear daytime photos of up to 3 and 4 craft in a frame. He's taken 8 films and a stunning video, all of which, we've got all this stuff in the film. How is it that people, when they hear of something like the Texas sighting or O'Hare, they've jumped to the conclusion that extraterrestrials are visiting us? They don't have a problem making mammoth cases all over the internet, UFO communities about ETs and UFOs, when what we're watching here is a demonstration, no doubt, of U.S. military secret craft to see just how people react to it. But Meier gives you the clearest stuff you've ever seen in your life, including a film where one of them is hovering over his head, and another one, a video where he zooms 300 feet across an open field and the darn thing's hovering in front of a tree in broad daylight. But suddenly, no, it doesn't exist.
Well, I'll tell you one reason, and it's sad but true. One reason that I think there's been a lot of questions about Meier's photos is that they're too good, and we've talked about this earlier, is that we are used to seeing over the years grainy, out-of-focus UFO photos and video and film, and this stuff obviously stands out. You mentioned about Jeff Ritzmann.
Sure.
and the challenge, and the fact that he said you couldn't use the photos of his objects. I think his viewpoint was, look, you have a website, that's your vehicle for marketing Meier material, and he didn't want his work product to be a part of it.
Well, a lot of the forums, and I'm not saying that Jeff did this, I don't know if he's got a webpage or not, a lot of the forums use Meier's photos, gratuitously.
They just take them.
Yeah, they just take them and post them. But look, if I'm going to make a case about something and challenge somebody, let's reverse it. I'm going to say, here, I can do this. I can duplicate these photos. Here they are. You betcha, post them up there.
I think his view also was, look, I'll produce this stuff and I'll put it up for an independent third-party analysis, but you are not putting your stuff up for analysis at the same level because you don't have the originals.
Well, my answer to that was, okay, I've written this article. It's on my website, and if your photos were in there, let people decide for themselves. Let them look and question. I make a case. Now, if somebody writes back and says, well, I disagree with you, fine. This is what makes it interesting, and this is what's supposed to happen here. There's supposed to be controversy. Now, if Jeff feels that he's going to make me rich by putting his photos in an article on a website that is solely self-promoted without even the Google ad, well, I'm sorry, I just don't buy that.
Tell me about the interpersonal play here, not only with Jeff, but David Biedney of the Paracast. I mean, there's a lot of animosity there. They say basically you're a snake oil salesman, and that after criticizing the case and your findings, that there have been threats back and forth and some really nasty stuff going on.
Well,
your take on that?
Okay, Mr. Biedney is a Photoshop expert. He and his partner have a radio show on the internet. primarily to the best of my knowledge. And they invited me on as a guest some time ago. What happened was I thought I'd be interviewed by both. I wasn't. I was interviewed by Mr. Steinberg. I happened to tune in to listen to it, and I noticed that at the end of the show, both of them were critiquing me, and I thought this was a little strange. I thought Mr. Biedny wasn't available. Oh, well. And then they said, we'll have you on again. I receive an email from Mr. Biedny that calls me and Meier all sorts of names. I've never met the guy. I didn't even have a conversation with him, but I'm a terrible liar, and Meier's a cult leader, and he's in it for the money. We have a radio encounter. He presents his information claiming that he's proven through Photoshop that one photo of Meier's is a deliberate double exposure done outside of the camera, and ultimately they claim Meier used an enlarger, and it was a light fixture hung in front of a black drape, et cetera, et cetera. So the funny thing is they have this forum, and it's being discussed on it, and another Photoshop expert comes on and challenges Biedny and says, I'm sorry, I don't find these artifacts you're talking about, or something to that effect. And there's this one kind of sheepish response that I thought was kind of unusual. Biedny says, oh, well, that's interesting. I guess I'll have to go back and look at it. Now, this other guy that I don't know and that I have no contact with, although I've seen him post, I did an internet search, and I don't know what the guy's name is right now, but he's posted on other forums about technical stuff having nothing to do with UFOs. Well, he doesn't post again, and Biedny goes back to the same thing about what a snake oil salesman I am and what a hoaxer Meier is. But I then take his argument and this thing, and I go to a guy I know who knows Photoshop, who's also been in the film industry for 50 years, movie maker, producer, special effects, and he's a skeptic about UFOs. I can never get to first base with him on UFOs. But I say, look, tell me, is this indeed a double exposure? He says, no. That's a triple exposure. Look, and he shows me. So see, 1, 2, 3. He says, this is most likely done outside of the camera. This would be inside the camera. He said this would be hard to do outside the camera unless the guy really had sophisticated equipment. And why? He says, you know what? And this is what everybody said. If he's really sure, and he's a photographer too, tell him to duplicate the photo. Well, of course, Biedny won't, but there's another icing on the cake. There's one more photo in the particular series that Mr. Biedny had criticized, and it's clearly not a double, triple, or any exposure. It's clear-on photo of the same object hovering in front of Meier's property at night. I think it's in that article. I'm not looking at my page now. And I said, well, is this also a double exposure? They won't even answer it. So for some reason, these guys get very excited about it, and then I discover on the Internet that there's discussions going on about me. Mr. Biedny has an interview online, and I don't want to take a lot of time with this. I don't want to,
Understood.
But I'll say the final thing. There is another radio interview with him where every possible truck driver profanity directed towards me and Meier is used to describe us, but there's nothing to substantiate, those charges.
I'll tell you, there was one thing in what Jeff Ritzman had written that I found pretty interesting, and it's about this garbage can or grain can lid.
Yes.
And he's referring to the wedding cake beam ship,
yes.
and he sees another photo of Billy Meier out in the corral or the barn or something, and there's a grain can and a lid that looks really remarkably similar to part of the beam ship.
Right. Well, this is another one of these gems in the whole story, and Mr. Ritzman is not the first person to enjoy some difficulty with it. That photo, actually, the lid of the can was being held by a guy I know named Phil McCaney from Canada, and it was posted on one of the websites of Meier, the FIGU, that's their organization. They posted it, and they showed it, and they showed the similarities of it. Now, why did they do that? Well, because indeed the grain can lid, although it's made out of black plastic, is very similar to the rim of the metal wedding cake craft. There are some problems, however. When the original investigators went to Switzerland, and they saw those photos, and they said, well, that's a pretty weird-looking thing. Maybe that's just some kind of a toy somebody made. They took those photos to a metallurgist, and they were told the following when they asked, of course, can you duplicate this? And the man said, well, yeah, I can make that. It'll cost you about $25,000. Because they were able to determine that the object that Meier photographed, which I have in an article about the wedding cake craft on my website, that's about 10 feet in diameter, the one sitting in the front lawn there. And I took photos from about the same area of a guy about 6 feet tall with some boxes, trying to get a sense of, well, is this really a small model? Now, it's a pretty hot debate. But that object is in that video of Meier's where he zooms across a field 300 feet. And it's also the gold object at night in a number of photos, including the one that's up on the website, in which the configuration has been changed in the top part of the ship. And I discovered that no one had noticed that for like 20